Hello everyone and welcome back. So here we are at the final lecture video in the Houdini Fundamentals class, and before we leave you, we would like to spend just a few minutes and talk about digital assets. Now you've been learning about various nodes and different contexts and how we can create geometry, particle shaders, etc. We can take all of these things and we can package them together in an asset that can be handed off to other artists to use. And as far as the other artist is concerned, they're going to see it as simply a node, and that's very powerful. We have the ability with these assets to go in and promote parameters up from within the networks that are inside of the asset itself, and then more or less create custom user interfaces that the artists can use to manipulate parameters that are down in the asset itself. We can also lock the asset so that artists cannot jump into the asset and muck things up by accident. We'd never want that to happen.
No, that would be bad.
And that's pretty much it. Just the key thing to remember is that a digital asset is nothing more than an encapsulation of networks. That's it. And as far as an artist is concerned, it's just a new operator, a new node. Okay, so Steve, we've got our stool here. I just wanted to spend a few minutes and talk about converting this stool over into a digital asset and how would we go about promoting our various parameters up so that those would be available at the top level on the asset itself.
Cool. Well, collapsing this guy into a digital asset is really simple. We're going to grab all of our nodes that create the stool, including our null. And with those nodes selected, we can right-click in empty space in our network editor, and we can come down to collapse. We can also use the shortcut Shift-C.
But let's do something, if you don't mind. Let's do something a little bit more. So this, you're not going to be expecting this.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and put a shop network in there.
Okay.
Let's just put a Vex Super material, a brown color, apply that brown color, just so that we can promote a color control as well to an upper level on the asset.
Before or after we make the asset? Because we can make the asset, we can still keep working.
I like the idea of let's make the asset, then we'll add that in.
Okay, cool.
Okay, that'll just show them how they can go back and continue working with it.
Continue working with an asset and then update that asset.
Okay, but just keep that in mind. I want to do that.
Awesome. So we can right-click in empty space, come down to collapse. That's going to collapse these selection of nodes into a subnetwork. And this subnetwork, as it stands, is kind of just created a new folder for us. So inside of our stool object, we have a /subnet folder, and inside of that /subnet folder, we have our nodes that we just collapsed down. So they are still all there. We can still work with them. They're just now inside another folder. So let's rename this folder to something that makes sense. Let's rename it to stool. And this folder is not yet a digital asset. It is simply a subnetwork, but we can convert it to a digital asset by right-clicking on the node and coming down to create digital asset. And we're going to get a few options for when we create our asset. The first is our operator name. This needs to be unique across all of our scene files. So we can give that the name stool, since we're not going to be creating any other stools within these scene files. The label is kind of like the human readable name for our asset. It's going to be what appears in our parameter editor when we create an instance of the node. It's going to be what appears in our tab menu when we want to drop an instance of our asset in. So I'm happy with stool with a capital S. We have to specify the minimum and maximum inputs. This works very much like when we were creating our new operator in VOPs, whereby we need to know, are we bringing in any network wires into our asset?
Yeah, do we need to bring data into the network inside of this digital asset so that we're going to be working on it? Because the asset that we may be creating could simply be seen as a new tool that works on data. So we might need the ability to bring data in, and this is where you'd specify how many inputs do you want to bring in. But in our particular case, we're treating this as a generator.
Yeah, it's a generator.
Yeah, it's just going to generate a stool for us, so we don't need any inputs.
So we don't need any inputs, so minimum and maximum is going to be 0. Now we have the ability to save this into an OTL file, and an OTL file is the file type used for saving digital assets. By default, we're going to see that it wants to put it in opcustom.otl. That's an OTL file that comes with Houdini. Is going to basically, when you create digital assets, you can save all of your digital assets into that OTL file if you wish, or you can create new OTL files. And a single OTL file can contain more than one asset. And we see that when we create the elevator, we actually create 3 assets inside a single OTL file. So I'm going to rename this instead of being opcustom.otl, I'm going to create this as stool.otl.
Or something that might make a little bit more sense, furniture.
Sure. So then if we were to create a table
Exactly.
or some other piece of furniture, we could save that into our OTL file as well. And I accidentally set that to 3, so I set that back down to 0. So, yeah, we create furniture.otl, and this OTL file will be created on disk, and inside it, all of our definition for our digital asset will be stored. Now, we have the ability to install digital assets, so it's going to basically, you need to install a digital asset to be able to create an instance of it, and by default, we're only installing to the current HIP file, and that means when we click accept, our digital asset will be recognized by our stool.hipnic, but in other scene files, if we were to create a new file, or if we were to load back into Houdini in a new file or anything like that, it wouldn't be installed. We can switch this over to scanned OTL directories, and that means because we've saved our OTL into an OTLs folder within one of the Houdini install paths, we get the OTL will be recognized when we load up Houdini, and it will be able to be created in any scene file that we create within this version of Houdini. So we're going to install to scanned OTL directories, because then when we create a new scene file later, we can show dropping in our stool asset and having the same asset that we'd have in this scene file.
Okay.
Cool. So with that, if we click accept, that's going to generate that OTL file, and it's going to give us a load of options for our asset. And it's worth noting now, when we were creating parameters and the likes for our node, we right-clicked on the node and went to edit parameter interface. When dealing with a digital asset, we come down to type properties. That is actually off the bottom of the capture region.
But it just says type properties.
It says type properties. Type properties is going to look very similar to edit parameter interface when we're on the parameters tab. It's essential to realize that type properties deals with all of the customization of a digital asset. Edit parameter interface is just for adding extra parameters to a node as opposed to an asset. But we do now have the ability to grab the parameters from our null and promote those up onto our asset. There's a number of ways to do that. We actually discuss a couple of those ways in a How Do I video.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to use this dialog to add them now. So I'm going to click on the cog icon next to existing parameters and uncheck the 2 prefix checkboxes. The first prefix link to parameter name with source node name, and the second is prefix link parameter label with source node label. What these do when they're turned on is going to take the node that our parameters come from, which we've named that to null1, and it will put that as a prefix to both our parameters name and our parameters label. We've seen names and labels when we added custom parameters in the channel referencing video. We don't really want to have the name and the label prefixed with these values because we've made our names and labels already descriptive and how we want them when we set them up on the null. So we really want to take those exactly as they are and bring them over to our asset. And so if we uncheck these 2 prefix checkboxes, we won't get null1 appended to the beginning of our names. Now, we have the ability to create new parameters. We've seen this drop-down menu before. We also have the ability to create parameters from existing nodes, and this is going to give us a browser where we can look into our network. So here's our stool asset. Inside our stool asset, we have our null. And on our null, we have all of our parameters that control our stool. So we can grab all of these guys.
You really want the cache one?
No, I don't. Thank you. So we can grab all of the guys that we actually added. The cache inputs obviously comes with a null by default. And with those selected, we can either click and drag them over to the existing parameters section, or we can click on the right arrow. And that's going to promote up our parameters from that null up onto our asset. They all come in with the same settings that we had when we created them on the null, same names and labels because we unchecked the prefix. We've got the same ranges, same data types. And they're also going to have default values of whatever we happen to have set when we promoted these guys up. So whatever we had set on our null currently to control that stool is going to be the default values. You'll also notice that we've got linked channels, and our null's channels are being controlled by these parameters. So our null is referencing these parameters, and then our rest of our network is referencing our null. It'd be really good to bypass that null so that
we take the middleman out.
Exactly, so that the rest of our network references the asset, and then we can get rid of the null, and the artist, if someone was to dive into our network, would never need to worry about the null. And we've also cleaned up our network a huge amount because we don't have this null sitting out there that really isn't doing anything.
Exactly, and there's another problem with the path that's there.
Well, there is and there isn't, because if you think about it, we've got linked channels that are in absolute, but this is telling us that that's what it's linked to. When we're referencing it, it's almost certainly going to be relative actually down on the null that's referencing back up.
Okay, I always get nervous anytime I
Anytime you
see hard names all the way through.
We can get rid of these and use dot slash.
Yeah, that's just me because, you know.
So dot slash stool being this stool as opposed to this stool, and null, and then our bar height. The fact of the matter is, when we delete out that null, we're going to lose these references anyway.
Exactly, that's a fact. So let's go ahead and do that real quick.
Cool. So I'm going to accept this window. Okay. That could possibly have been that when I typed in that new parameter, it errored out, so it wasn't happy with that. I'm guessing it's because the linked parameters is set up. In that case, it was set up by default for us because of the way that we promoted the parameters, and so going in and editing it wasn't very happy.
We're about to change that anyway, so.
Actually, I know exactly why that was an issue.
Okay.
I'm going to bring back up the type properties by right-clicking on our node and coming down to type properties.
This just shows you can get right back in there.
Yeah, it's got rid of our... I used dot slash stool. Well, dot is us with a stool. Slash, there's no stool inside us.
Right.
I wanted dot slash stool or dot slash null1. And then the parameter that it would have been controlling, and that would have not caused that error. So that error was because I used dot slash. Dot is the stool, which we can see our stool here. So dot slash stool, we don't have a stool inside, so that was going to throw up an error. Awesome. So I'll cancel that out. And let's jump inside our stool and come to our null. And we can see, yeah, our bar height has been disconnected because of the error that occurred. But all of these guys are referencing our parameters, and they are using relative referencing. So let's go and bypass our null. So we can go to all of our other nodes, and where we're referencing our null, we can simply now reference the parameters we created on our digital asset. And because we've used the same names, it's going to be really simple to do so. So let's take a look at these parameters. I'll bring that up in an expression editor. So he's not referencing the null. He's not referencing the null. This guy is. So instead of referencing the leg radius on our null, well, what can we do? We can take out the null. So now we go dot slash up to our asset that's sitting on top of us.
We're right there.
And we're right there, and we're referencing now the leg radius that's on our asset. In the same way, we can reference dot slash height for our height on our leg. And that's going to go up to the asset that's above us and grab the height parameter that's on the asset. So here, due to the way that we've got these set up, we simply just need to remove the word null wherever we see it, and that's going to work perfectly. So I'm just jumping through all of our nodes and removing null so that our parameters are now referenced directly on the asset. And since it's such a simple network, this will be a very quick procedure. You'll see when we come to create digital assets from scratch, we'll almost certainly create the asset first, then start creating parameters on that asset and link those parameters down straight away, so you never have a null in place and you never have to worry about this bypassing step. However, since when we created this tool we hadn't discussed creating digital assets, we left out creating the digital asset until this later stage, and that's why we had to create the null.
Exactly.
So accept. Let's get rid of null here. And here. Oh. Wow, it's all over the place in this expression. I'm just keeping an eye over here to make sure nothing's exploding.
Yeah, because you'll know.
Oh yeah. As soon as one of these parameters dies, since we've already got so many interlinked references, if one parameter dies, you'd see something explode with our... I've already done that guy. That should be everything. We should be able to delete out the null and not have our stool explode. Fantastic.
Yep.
So now, if we jump up a level to our stool asset, we now have control over all our parameters, but on the asset itself as opposed to on that null. Just make sure all of these guys work. Very cool.
Very nice.
So you wanted to jump in, create a shop manager so that we could just chuck a simple shader onto this guy?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Fantastic. So we're down inside our stool again, and we've seen managers in the previous video. So I'm going to push tab, and I'm going to create a shop network. And let's call this stool_shop. So I'm going to jump down inside to see we're working with the shaders context. I'm going to create a Vex Super material. And I'm not going to spend long setting this up. I'm literally going to
just put
give it
a
brown diffuse color, and we'll call it there, just so that we can see that we do have a shader. So now if I jump back up, not 2 levels though. Do you want to assign it to everything?
Yeah, we'll just assign it to all.
So after our merge, I'm going to wire into a material SOP, bring the visibility down onto this guy, and specify our material as the V super material, making sure to change this so that we're using relative referencing. We saw that in the previous video. There we go. So // up to our stool, then / into our stool shop, then / to our material. So we can see we've got our material applied. Tell you what would be cool, should we promote up that color parameter to the asset?
That's what I was wanting to do, yeah.
Fantastic. So let's do that a different way, even though this has been covered in but how do I? We'll do it here as well. So I'm going to right click on the stool, bring up the type properties, and with this window open, I'm going to jump down to the parameters for our material. I'm going to right click on our diffuse color, and I'm going to come down to export parameter to type properties, and that will export this parameter up to our type properties. And if we click apply, it will now link that parameter to this newly created diffuse parameter, which I will rename to diffuse color. English spelling, yes, small victory. So with that, we now have diffuse color up on our asset. We can bring this up, work with it like any other color, and we can change the color of our stool.
Outstanding.
So there's one last thing to take a look at. We've made some modifications to this asset since the first time we selected our subnet and said create digital asset. We've bypassed that null, we've created a shop network, we've created new parameters. We need to update that asset definition that we have on disk. So we've got our OTL file, and it's currently not, the OTL file, the asset that's in that, isn't the same as the asset we have on disk, in our file. So what we can do, we can say, take all the changes that we've made to this asset and save those out back to disk, and we can do that by right-clicking on our digital asset and come down to Save Operator Type. So that's going to take all of those changes, and our OTL file on disk now contains this exact network with all of the changes that we've made. Now, what we can also do, if we right-click on a digital asset, is say Match Current Definition. That will take our asset, it will find out which OTL file and which asset in that OTL file it's come from, and it will make the asset that's in our scene match whatever happens to be in that file. Now, we know currently they are the same, so if we say Match Current Definition, we'll get no changes, except for now our asset is locked for making changes. If we jump inside and went to any of these parameters, they're all grayed out because we can't make changes. If you wanted to jump back in and make changes, you'd need to right-click on the node and choose Allow Editing of Contents. Now, say that our asset on disk and our asset in the scene were different. By right-clicking and coming down to, well, it's not there anymore because of the menu changing. But if we were to have said Match Current Definition and the definition on disk was different, our asset in the scene would have changed to match whatever that definition on disk was.
And that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I will point out, say that you didn't have a OTL file installed, say that we chosen to install it just into the current file and not into all scanned directories. You can easily install an OTL file by coming down to File, Install Digital Asset Library, and you can browse to an OTL and choose whether you wish to install it just for the current HIP file or the scanned OTL directories. I'll also point out our asset is a geometry level asset, so if we jump up and create a new geometry node, we can jump inside it, we can push tab, and from the digital assets folder, we now have stool. This is our stool that we've created as an asset with its default parameters. We can come in here and change the color, we can change the height and the radius, and now we have 2 stools, and we created this stool very quickly because now we have an asset for creating the stool.
Exactly. All right. Well, Steve, I think that's going to wrap up the Houdini Fundamentals class. We're going to do a quick conclusion video, and that's pretty much it. guys, I'd like to thank you for hanging in there and going through all of these videos if you have, and hopefully you've gained enough out of it to have a fundamental understanding of the way Houdini functions. Now, of course, there are hundreds and hundreds of nodes that you can explore, and the possibilities really are endless. With that, that is going to wrap up this video. Thanks a lot.